I used to hate these stories. Transmigration novels, palace dramas, idiot protagonists who made the worst possible choices and then cried about the consequences. I'd sit there thinking, if that were me, I'd do better. And then I woke up inside one. Not as the hero, not even as a side character. I woke up as Lin Yao, the disgraced noble everyone already hates. The man who bullied the crown prince. The man whose name people spit like a curse. There's no reset button. I wasn't in the early chapters to easily fix things. I couldn't easily explain that I'm not the same person. The city wants me gone. The court wants me dead. And the crown prince? He has every reason to be the one holding the blade. So I did the only thing I could think of and used public sentiment. I walked into the middle of a festival, dropped to my knees, and gambled my life on the hope that sympathy, dignity, honesty, and endurance might be enough to change a fate that was already set in stone.
Welcome to the Portal Library. Step through and let the magic begin. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you'd love more stories or have a request. New videos uploaded every Friday.
A Life That Refused to End, a BL short story. I used to hate watch transmigration stories the way people hate watch reality TV. Not because the concept was dumb. The concept is fine. The people were dumb. Every time it was the same thing. Someone wakes up in a novel world, and instead of doing the most basic survival math, they start beefing with fate, picking fights with the male lead, or flirting like that's going to erase consequences. No planning, no caution, no, maybe I shouldn't antagonize the guy who kills people for breathing wrong. Just vibes, just plot armor, just comments full of OMG, he's so brave. And I would be sitting there on my couch like, be so serious. If that were me, I'd type scrolling through the mess. I'd apologize early, keep my head down, build goodwill, and coast. Easy. That was always my favorite part. How easy I thought it'd be. So when I opened my eyes and didn't see my cracked apartment ceiling, I didn't even panic at first. I was annoyed, because instead of my busted blinds and the stupid streetlight that never shuts off, I was looking at heavy silk curtains, the kind that actually block light, the kind I've only ever seen in period dramas or rich people hotels. I sat up fast, too fast, and immediately froze. My body felt wrong, not pain wrong, not I'm dying wrong, more like foreign, like I'd been dropped into someone else's skin and my brain hadn't caught up yet. Even the little stuff felt off. The weight of my arms, the length of my fingers, the way my back moved like it didn't have the usual tight spot near my shoulder blade. I looked down automatically like that would fix it. No familiar scars, no little marks I'd had for years. My hands were smoother. My wrists looked slimmer. I flexed my fingers like I was testing a new pair of gloves, and it made my stomach twist because, yeah, my body was reacting like it knew what to do, but it didn't feel like me doing it. I swung my legs off the bed and stood up, and even that felt unnerving, like I was watching myself stand, like the motion happened and I was a beat behind it. Across the room in the corner, there was this elaborate bronze mirror, not the cheap kind you hang on a door. This one was tall, framed like someone wanted it to be worshipped. I took 2 steps toward it and my chest tightened before I even saw my face clearly. When I did, I swear my brain went quiet. The face staring back at me was pale and pretty in a way that didn't feel real. Smooth skin, sharp eyes, that delicate kind of noble beauty you can't buy in my world without surgery and good lighting. I just stared. Then the recognition hit like a drop in my stomach. "Oh," I said out loud, and my voice was different too. Lighter, cleaner, like it belonged to someone who never had to yell over a subway. "You've got to be fucking kidding me." Because if my suspicion was right, there was no way I was waking up as the protagonist. In those stories, you're never the protagonist. No. If I was here, if this was real, then this face being this familiar meant I was in deep shit. This wasn't my world. Either I was dreaming, passed out somewhere, or I had gotten dragged into one of those stupid novels I'd spent months roasting. And the role I'd been handed? Yeah, I knew exactly who this was. I was the villain. Not the cool villain either. Not the misunderstood tragic backstory villain. The annoying one. The jealous noble with too much time and too much pride. The one whose entire personality was make the crown prince miserable. And I remembered that story. I remembered reading it and thinking, this dude is insane. Like, genuinely. So single-minded, so obsessed, so dedicated to ruining one specific person's life that at some point I'd paused and thought, half joking, half not, are you sure he doesn't just like him? Because from the outside, obsession and devotion look the exact same when someone's spiraling. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, opened them again. Still here, still him. Okay, I muttered. Okay, fine. I can do this. I've read too many of these. Redemption arcs are basically a guarantee if you don't act like an idiot. The trick is timing. Apologize early, show change, be useful, be humble, make it public. Let people see it. I told myself that while I got dressed. I told myself that while I walked out of the bedroom. By the time I stepped into the hallway, I was confident enough to smile. That confidence lasted about 3 minutes, because the mansion was quiet in a way that made my skin crawl. Not peaceful quiet, empty quiet. No servants, no guards, no footsteps, no busy house sounds. Just long corridors, big rooms, expensive furniture, and the kind of silence that only happens when a place used to be full of people, and now isn't. I walked past an open doorway and saw dust gathered in the corners like nobody had cared in days. I thought, okay, so the fall already happened. That alone should have scared me more than it did. But I was still in that delusional stage where I thought I could fix anything if I just acted right. So I decided my first move was obvious. Go to the palace, see the crown prince, apologize, humble, public, clean. I headed for the front gate like I was going to work, like this was just a rough morning that would turn into a successful comeback montage. And I actually stopped short when I saw someone there. A single guard, not a whole security detail. Just one man standing at the gate like the last piece of dignity this family had left. He bowed when he saw me. Deep, automatic, not warm, but correct. Then he opened the gate without a word. That surprised me more than it should have, because part of me had expected, I don't know, a locked gate, a sign, someone laughing in my face, something dramatic. Instead, I got a silent bow and an open exit, like the house was letting me leave and not promising it would protect me outside. I stepped into the street and made it about halfway down the road before the staring started. Not curious staring, not, oh, who is that staring. The kind of staring that makes your shoulders tense up because you can feel it on your skin. The kind where people aren't just looking at you, they're judging you, like they're remembering you, like they're thinking, oh, so you're still alive. I kept walking anyway. Then someone spat near my feet, close enough that I heard it hit the ground. My throat went dry. I didn't react. I couldn't. Everything in my head was screaming, don't do anything stupid. Don't create a scene. Don't trigger a chain of events. Don't become the villain again in front of witnesses. Hey, someone called loud. Isn't that him? Laughter, more laughter. Someone threw a stone. It hit my shoulder and it wasn't hard enough to do real damage, but it stung. Sharp, hot, enough to make my heart slam. I flinched before I could stop myself. And the second I flinched, the laughter got worse. My face burned. The palace suddenly felt very far away, and with the stairs and the spit and the rock still pulsing in my shoulder, I realized I didn't actually know how to walk through this city like I belonged in it. I turned around. I hated myself for it, but I turned around and I basically jogged back home like a coward. Inside the mansion, my parents were arguing in low, frantic voices. Something about injustice, about betrayal, about how the empire had gone too far, about how this couldn't be allowed to stand. I walked into the room and just stared at them, and a chill ran down my back. Because I've read this part. This is where the fallen family stops adapting. This is where they start making plans that sound like pride and ends in execution. This is how foolish nobles die in stories like this. That night I couldn't sleep. My stomach kept reminding me loudly that there were no servants, No dinner waiting, no routine, no comfort. So I went into the kitchen. I tried to cook. I found rice and I thought, how hard can rice be? And then burned it so badly the smell took over the entire floor. The pot was ruined. My eyes watered. I stood there staring at smoke like I was being punished personally. And the next morning, I woke up hungry enough to be brave again, or maybe hungry enough to be stupid. Either way, I left the mansion again. People still stared. The disdain was still there. But at least nobody threw anything at me on that walk. I kept my head down and moved fast, like if I didn't look at anyone, they couldn't fully decide to hate me. I told myself it was temporary, that this world was just like the stories, that once I apologized the right way, public, humble, dramatic enough, people would soften. They'd gossip. They'd turn it into a redemption narrative. And then, obviously, everyone would be obsessed with me. Because that's how those stories go, right? I made it to the palace. I actually made it. And to no one's surprise but my own, they didn't let me through the gates. The guards didn't even look at me at first. I tried talking. I tried asking for anyone. Not even for the crown prince, but for any officials, any servant, someone who could take a message. Nothing. They stared straight ahead like I was invisible. But the moment I stepped closer, the moment I tested the boundary like an idiot, their eyes snapped to me. And the look on their faces was so cold I stopped immediately. It wasn't leave, it was try it and we'll split you in half. My mouth went dry again. In humiliation, real humiliation, the kind that tastes metallic, I backed away. Then I walked home, and on that walk back, once word spread that the palace had rejected me, people got brave again. Someone threw something rotten. It hit my sleeve and slid down my arm, leaving this foul stink behind. I looked at it and my stomach turned. It was a child, a kid, small enough to run behind an adult's legs after doing it, and there was nothing I could do. If I yelled, if I reached for him, if I reacted like the villain everyone remembered, that's it. That's the story snapping back into place. So I tightened my jaw, wiped my arm as best as I could, and picked up my pace. That night, I sat on silk sheets in a mansion that suddenly felt like a joke. My stomach rumbled so loud it made me angry. I was hungry, really fucking hungry. And for the first time since I opened my eyes in this world, it hit me. This wasn't going to be one of those easy stories where you act cute for 3 chapters and everyone forgives you. This was going to be work. The ugly kind. The kind where you earn survival inch by inch. Over the next few days, the city got used to seeing me. The stares didn't stop. The gossip didn't stop. But the adults mostly kept their hands to themselves, probably because they didn't want to risk getting dragged into trouble over a disgraced noble. I did whatever work I could get, anything a shop owner was willing to let me do. Anything that didn't require trust, just labor, carry crates, scrub floors, help in kitchens. And when I could, I used whatever scraps of my former status still clung to me to tutor people's children. The money was better, the humiliation was worse, and rumors followed me everywhere. They didn't even whisper half the time. People said it openly like they wanted me to hear, that it was an act, that I was desperate, that I was setting up some clever trick. Some of them were literally betting on when I'd crack, like this was entertainment, like my downfall was a sport. Somewhere behind the palace walls in the gardens that never stopped being beautiful, no matter who's starving outside them, I knew the crown prince would be hearing it too. My name, again and again. By the end of my first week in this new world, I felt like I'd worked harder than I ever did back home. My hands were dry, cramped, and full of rough patches. The kind you get from doing things your body isn't used to doing, every single day, because you want to eat. I had never worked like this in my life. Don't get me wrong, I've done jobs, I've done hard things. In the real world, I'd taken odd jobs at bookstores, libraries, I'd helped run reading groups, I'd substituted in schools when I needed money. I'd worked. I wasn't a stranger to effort. But this was survival work. This was, if someone takes pity on you today, you'll eat tonight. And every night I came back to that mansion and my parents were still talking about reclaiming what was taken. Alliances, revenge, forcing the palace to listen. Every time I tried to talk them down, it only made them angrier. like I was insulting them by suggesting they accept reality, like my fear was betrayal, and it scared me shitless because it felt like the plot was moving towards something no matter what I did. Like I could scream into the void for days and fate would still be like, cute effort, anyway. And slowly, horribly, it became obvious. I hadn't transmigrated early. I had transmigrated too fucking late. It was too late for an apology to erase what this body had done, especially for going after the crown prince. Too late for people to misunderstand and soften. If I'd come here when we were younger, if this was one of those stories where you get a school arc first, I could have bumped into him at some banquet, challenged him to a duel, pulled some cute rivalry to lovers nonsense. But of course, I didn't get that version. Number one, I got the aftermath. I lay on my back that night, staring at the ceiling, running scenarios like I was doing math. What could work? What could keep me alive? How to salvage this before my parents dragged us all into an early grave. And the thought landed in my chest, heavy and clear. I need to do damage control. This is me living inside the consequences of someone else's stupid decisions. And if I don't change something fast, I'm not going to survive long enough to see any kind of ending, let alone a happy one. By the second week, I stopped actively thinking about ways to fix my reputation. At first, I treated it like a problem to solve, something I could optimize if I just picked the right approach. Apologize publicly, show growth, be visible in the right places. But that mindset didn't last long. Hunger has a way of shrinking your priorities until the only thing that matters is getting through the day. So I took things one day at a time. Most of those days were embarrassingly simple. Find food, find work, try not to get publicly humiliated before lunch. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't poetic, it was boring, repetitive, and necessary. Hunger isn't some cinematic villain that shows up with a soundtrack. It just sits there and makes everything else less pleasant until you deal with it or start making bad decisions. So I worked. I worked myself to the bone, and I kept my head down while I did it, because the worst part wasn't the labor. The worst part was knowing any employer could change their mind halfway through just because they recognized my face. I carried crates. I swept floors. I washed dishes. I ran errands. I helped in kitchens. I took construction work when it was offered. Anything that ended with a few coins or a bowl of something warm was fair game. I learned quickly which streets were safer, which shopkeepers would tolerate me for a few coins, which people were content to stare and whisper, and which ones would get bold enough to say it to my face or try to make it physical. The strange thing was how predictable it all became, not because I was especially clever, but because I'd seen this storyline before. Fallen noble, public disgrace, slow social rot. Only this time I wasn't watching it unfold on a page. I was the one living it. What actually kept me afloat wasn't the hard labor. It was the work that relied on education. This body came from the Lin family, and even after the family's fall, the skills didn't disappear with the servants. I could read, I could write, I could do math. More importantly, I knew when to keep my mouth shut. Most common families couldn't afford literacy training, and even when they could, they usually chose one child and hoped the rest would learn by proximity. Merchants were always one bad deal away from getting cheated if they didn't have a scholar in the family, and scholars were expensive. That made me useful and needed. Tutoring and ledger work became my lifeline. A merchant named Shu, the kind of man who smiled like he was always counting your teeth, started hiring me to help with his books. The work itself wasn't humiliating. What was humiliating was how determined he was to make sure everyone knew who he'd hired. He'd clap me on the shoulder like we were old friends and say, loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear, "Look at that. Even the Lin family can be useful sometimes. Isn't that something?" People would laugh like it was a joke, and I would stand there with ink on my fingers, smiling politely, pretending I wasn't calculating how many bowls of rice that laugh had just bought me. At night, I went home to a mansion that felt emptier by the day. For the first few nights, I wandered through the rooms out of habit, like I was giving myself a tour of a place I didn't belong in. By the middle of the second week, I stopped doing that. The house felt too deserted, too hollow, and honestly unsettling once you stayed in one place long enough to notice the silence. That was when I started noticing the visitors. Not the usual gawkers who slowed down to stare at the Lin estate, not neighbors pretending not to be curious. These were people I didn't recognize. Though, to be fair, even if this body had known them, I doubt I would have remembered their faces. They moved carefully, like they didn't want to be seen. They came through the side gate. They didn't knock. They were ushered inside like they'd been expected. They were meeting my parents. They met often, too often for my comfort. The first time I caught the tail end of a conversation, my father's voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere deeper than his throat. "Restore," he said over and over again, like it was a prayer or the only word left in his brain. My mother hummed along quietly, and the sound made my skin crawl. I stood in the hallway listening, and for a second I got the same sinking feeling I'd had when I saw my reflection in the bronze mirror the morning I woke up in this world. If you didn't know any better, you'd think they were possessed. From the outside, it looked like the plot itself was demanding to move forward no matter what. They were so single-minded it felt eerie, and no matter what I said, I couldn't make them see anything else. You know how fallen nobles get in stories, right? Right before they drag the entire bloodline into the ground. I tried talking to them. I tried reasoning. I tried pleading. I even tried being cruel, threatening to cut myself off from them completely, thinking the shock might snap them out of it. Nothing worked. The more I pushed, the more they looked at me like I was the enemy, and that scared the hell out of me. I wasn't trying to abandon them. I wasn't trying to be heartless. But I could feel the world tightening around us, like a noose you don't notice until you turn your head and it pulls. One night, after my mother dismissed me with a wave like I was a servant, I went back to my room and sat on the bed with my head in my hands. "Okay, Lin Yao, think." Because here was the truth. If my parents went down, I was probably going with them. In stories, the family collapses together. It's always some poetic, cruel bullshit like that. If I couldn't convince them to stop, I needed to get them out of the capital. I needed distance. I needed time. And I had to do it without making it look like betrayal, because betrayal was the one thing that would make them move faster. So I lied and tricked them. I told them there was a ball being hosted in a port town on the border, one of those coastal places where rich people pretend they're escaping court politics while doing the exact same politics in nicer clothes. The difference was that it was far enough from the capital that it didn't actually matter. It was mostly vanity, a vacation town dressed up as prestige. I told them they could attend, be seen again, and remind the world that the Lin family still existed. Their eyes lit up, and honestly, that alone sealed the deal. It took a weight off my shoulders because it confirmed what I already knew. Survival didn't matter to them as much as visibility did. They agreed immediately. I went to Chu and offered him a deal so lopsided it barely qualified as negotiation. I would handle ledger work, inventory tallies, letters, contracts, anything written or financial, for him and for any merchants connected to him, at a price so low it was practically free. In exchange, he would escort my parents to that port town with his caravan, keep them housed, keep them busy, and make sure they didn't rush back to the capital the moment someone whispered promises in their ear. Instead of paying me properly, he would cover their food and basic care. Two older people didn't require much. Chu smiled like a man who had just won the lottery. "Former nobles doing my books?" he said, delighted. "No one's going to believe me." I didn't care what story he got to tell. I cared that my parents would be away from whoever had been feeding them that madness. A few days later, my parents left without any complications. They didn't look sad to leave me behind, which stung more than I expected. Then I reminded myself sharply that these weren't my parents. They were characters in a story, and I was doing the best I could for the body I'd hijacked. When the carriage disappeared down the road, I stood in the courtyard and let out a breath so long my ribs hurt. Then I shut down the mansion. I closed doors. I locked wings. I covered furniture. I moved everything I needed into the part of the house closest to the kitchen. I wasn't going to heat an entire estate to prove an imaginary point, and I wasn't going to starve in a palace-sized shell out of pride. I started selling the smaller things my parents wouldn't immediately notice. Duplicates, decorative nonsense, valuables that screamed wealth but did nothing to keep you alive. Every time I did, I felt lighter, like I was shaving off dead weight. I learned how to cook too. I was terrible at first. It was embarrassing. But I got better by watching the cooks in the merchant houses where I worked. They gave me simple recipes, let me shadow them after hours, and showed me what actually mattered. The women at the market helped as well once they realized I was genuinely trying. Some ignored me. Others rolled their eyes and answered anyway. Most people help when it costs them nothing, and I took what I could get. By the time the third week hit, my days had a rhythm. I worked with merchants. I tutored when parents could afford it. I sold something small when I needed to. I cooked simple meals to survive. I walked home through a city that still didn't forgive me. I kept telling myself this was how redemption worked. It needed time, repetition, and consistency. Then the restrictions came. An official notice was left with the guard at the gate one morning, sealed and formal, reminding me how precarious my position still was and how badly this character had screwed up before I ever got here. New taxes, new penalties, repayment deadlines moved up, court events off limits, the Royal Library barred, any civic building tied to the palace closed to me unless explicitly invited. I stood in the entryway reading it over and over again, and then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because, of course, this was how it went. This world wasn't going to let me work quietly. I crushed the paper in my fist until my knuckles went white. In my head, I was cursing violently enough to impress my old self. But underneath the anger was something else. A thin, cautious hope. Someone at the palace was paying attention. They had to be. Why else would they tighten restrictions now? I wasn't naive enough to think it was Crown Prince Zhao Jingyan himself, but maybe it was an advisor, a clerk, someone close enough to notice movement and decide to be cautious. Either way, it meant the palace knew I was doing something. So I pushed harder, and I stayed consistent. I started helping in places nobles pretended didn't exist. Shelters, soup kitchens, makeshift dormitories, where the elderly slept packed together. I offered space in the mansion at first, and that was a mistake. People needed it, but accepting help from the Lin family meant inviting the empire's attention. So I stopped offering space and started offering things. Furniture I couldn't sell, blankets, chairs and tables no one wanted. Some of the merchants' workers helped me move them, and I made sure it looked practical and not performative. The adults stayed wary, but the children's opinion shifted faster. Kids were the first to throw things at me, but they also forgot faster when your behavior stopped matching the story they'd been told. One boy who used to call me Rat Noble stared at the donated furniture and asked why I was doing this. "Because you need it," I said. He frowned like it didn't compute and ran off. Later, a woman at the shelter told me the children had been arguing about me. That night, I sat by the kitchen fire eating something that was mostly edible and stared at the wall, trying to see the shape of the story ahead of me. The labor changed the city folks, but it didn't change the story fast enough. If I wanted to survive, I needed a turning point the empire couldn't ignore. It had to be public. It had to have witnesses. It had to force the palace to acknowledge that I wasn't playing the same role anymore. I leaned back against the wall and muttered to myself, "Okay, Lin Yao, what's the play?" In the palace, Crown Prince Zhao Jingyan read the reports with the same expression he wore for most things: calm, composed, unfrazzled. The Lin family had not disappeared like most disgraced houses did. They had not fled. They had not begged for reinstatement. Instead, the heir, Lin Yao, had become a problem of a different kind. He was too visible. A former noble working in merchant stalls, handling ledgers, tutoring children, giving away furniture, moving through the city like a man trying to mend his reputation one day at a time. Zhao Jingyan's advisors flagged it as manipulation, a strategy to gain sympathy and rebuild influence through common people when the court doors were closed. Zhao Jingyan agreed with them in court because considering the alternative would be foolish. The alternative was that Lin Yao had truly changed, and Zhao Jingyan did not believe in sudden transformations without cost or benefit. So he tightened restrictions. He moved repayment deadlines forward. He applied pressure carefully, deliberately, to see what would give. If Lin Yao was faking, he would crack soon. If he was sincere, he would endure these restrictions and continue to help the common people. Either outcome would tell Zhao Jingyan what he needed to know. He set the report down, intending to move on. But after a moment, he picked it back up and read it again, line by line, his fingers pausing on the paper and feeling something he hadn't expected to feel. A couple of uneventful weeks passed after all of that. I kept working. I kept tutoring when I could. I kept doing the same routine over and over, hoping that the repetition could help convince the city that I wasn't the same person anymore. Some days it felt like I was making progress. Other days it felt like I was standing in the same place, watching the same hateful faces cycle through the same rumors. And slowly, without me even realizing it at first, my hope started slipping. I started waking up with less fight in me. I started catching myself thinking, maybe I'm never going to get anywhere. Maybe this is just my life now. Work, paranoia, survival, and then whatever ending the plot had planned for Lin Yao. Until I noted some changes in the city. Merchants were ordering more stock than usual. Stalls that normally took their time unloading were moving like they had a deadline. People weren't just busy, they were moving around with purpose. You could walk down an entire street and barely find anyone standing still. Even families who had nothing to sell looked like they were preparing for something. People were sweeping storefronts, carrying baskets, hauling decorations, arguing over supplies, laughing, and just overall really excited. The kids were really giddy. They came running up to me while I was helping a vendor stack crates, talking over each other, practically vibrating with excitement. "The Harvest Festival!" One of them blurted out, eyes widening like it was the greatest thing in the world. I didn't even need to understand the details yet. The second I heard the name, something clicked in my head. A festival like that was the perfect stage. It was a public event with rules and tradition, and a crowd big enough to make anything that happened impossible to contain. I even learned later on that, apparently in this world, it was customary for the royal family to send a representative. Someone important enough to show that the palace valued its people, but controlled enough to keep the whole thing from turning into chaos. They would walk through the market, inspect the goods, ask questions, see how the people were living, and make sure everyone felt like the empire actually cared how the harvest turned out. Which meant this wasn't just a festival, this was politics. And honestly, I could understand why this royal family was so loved by the people. If the palace really based its power on public trust like that, then of course they would hate nobles who abused commoners. Of course they would crush families who treated their people like disposable property. That realization didn't make my situation less terrifying, but it made it clearer. The empire wasn't just power-hungry royals. It had values and an image to maintain. And if I wanted to survive, I needed to force myself into that story in a way they couldn't ignore. So I started hoping for an opportunity where I could redeem myself. Because if they were sending a representative, and if this festival mattered this much, then there was a real chance they would send the crown prince. In stories like this, the crown prince is always the one who shows face. He's the one who shakes hands, speaks to the people, meets delegates, builds reputation, and proves he deserves to inherit the throne. And if he came, then I had one shot. I needed to confront him in a public way, with witnesses, so the palace couldn't quietly bury the interaction afterward. I needed to get close enough to speak without getting shoved into the dirt by his guards. I needed enough time to say something that mattered before the crowd turned against me again. The start of the festival became my deadline and the public confrontation my goal. And for the first time in weeks, I had something tangible to hold on to. It gave me motivation and direction. It made me plan like my life depended on it, because it did. But as the festival got closer, the doubt started creeping in. Not because I didn't want to do it, because I could suddenly think of 1,000, no more, like 1,000,000 ways things could go wrong. 1,000,000 ways I could make things worse instead of better. 1,000,000 ways I could walk right up to the crown prince and get myself executed on the spot for disrespect or threatening behavior or whatever excuse his guards wanted to use. And then another thought hit me, harder than any of the others. The fact that I was all alone in this God-forsaken world. I feel like they always gloss over that in the stories. I didn't have friends here. I didn't have a support system. I didn't have anyone I could laugh with, or lean on, or even complain to without it turning into a weapon against me. I started missing my friends from my old world so badly it almost made me want to give up. I missed being able to call someone and just be understood. Instead, I was banking my entire survival on one public moment going right. That realization made the pressure multiply. On the morning of the festival, I stood in front of a mirror and stared at the clothes that used to belong to Lin Yao. There were still a few decent outfits left, expensive enough that I could put them on and instantly look like a noble again. But I didn't want that. If I showed up dressed like I was in court, the city would remember why it hated me, and everything would be over before I even opened my mouth. They wouldn't listen long enough for me to say anything meaningful. So I didn't wear the noble clothes. I chose something comfortable, neat, and clean. The kind of outfit that wouldn't stand out unless you were already looking for me. The day of the festival, I stepped out onto the street with one goal in mind. The festival was the liveliest I had seen this city since I arrived. People were smiling ear to ear. The energy was loud and bright, and the whole place truly reflected joy. There were more people gathered than I'd ever seen in one place. Kids were laughing and sprinting between crowds. Traveling artists were playing music. People were dancing like they didn't care who was watching, and the market was overflowing with stalls. Food, accessories, handmade art, small services, little games, trinkets, sweets, anything you could imagine. Someone had found a way to sell it. It was chaotic, but it was the kind of chaos that made you feel alive. For a few moments, I let myself enjoy it. I took everything in and actually appreciated that this world wasn't only misery. Back home, I was always worrying about bills, work, time, still trying to survive, but in a less literal death way. There were moments like this where I would never let myself relax. And then, of course, in a fucking predictable manner, my joy didn't last. A group of nobles noticed me, and for reasons I will never understand, they decided that making my life miserable was a better use of their festival day than actually enjoying the goddamn festival. They started stalking me. Every time I tried to help a stall owner I knew, they showed up like a disease. They didn't even have to touch me. They just hovered nearby and made sure everybody could hear them. Criminal blood. Filthy charity. Hiring rats who pretend to be people. Just pathetically verbally harassing me and driving all the customers away. They made it so that the moment someone saw me, they would hesitate, then ask me to leave. The worst part was watching it hurt the merchants. They didn't deserve that. They were just trying to make money today. I kept telling myself not to react. I kept reminding myself that I had a goal. These nobles were small fries. Confronting them would only make things worse. And today was too important to waste on a fight I couldn't win. But eventually it got too much. A stall owner pulled me aside and spoke in a low voice that still carried anger. "I can't keep you here," he said. "I'm losing money, and today is the biggest day of the season for us." I felt my face heat up. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him it wasn't my fault. I wanted to say the nobles were the problem, not me. But he was right. So I swallowed my pride and stepped away from the stalls and moved toward the main fountain area, where kids were playing and performers had gathered a crowd. If I could blend in anywhere, it was there. And that was where I waited. My eyes stayed on the streets that fed into the market. I watched the movement of people. I watched for guards. I watched for that particular kind of space opening up in a crowd when someone important was approaching. Then thankfully, a few minutes later, a mob started forming on the edge of the street, shifting like the crowd itself had been pulled towards something. Even from a distance, I could recognize the posture of royal guards, the way they carried themselves, the way people gave ground without even realizing they were doing it. And at the center of it, surrounded by too many people for it to be anything else, was one figure walking all dignified and elegant. I couldn't make out every detail yet, but I didn't need to. That was for sure the Crown Prince. It gotta be. My heart started beating so hard I thought I might pass out. And still, I forced myself to move, because fear didn't matter anymore. I had chosen this moment, and if I backed out now, I would definitely regret and still die later anyway. I needed to get close enough to speak, and I needed to do it in a way that made me look harmless. So I went to the only people in this city who had started treating me like I was human. The women who volunteered at the orphanage were the ones who worked, organized, cleaned, and fed the kids. They were the closest thing to friends I had in this world. I told them what I needed. I told them why. I told them I wasn't planning anything violent, that I just needed a few moments to speak publicly, to confess, to force the palace to actually look at me. They looked at me like I had lost my mind. Then one of them sighed and said, "You've got guts, kid." And somehow that was enough. They told me to leave it to them. They had a plan. So while the crown prince's entourage made its way toward the central market, I went to the orphanage, and the women were already waiting. They dressed me, styled me, and turned me into someone unrecognizable. When they were done, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. I looked beautiful. And I almost hated how effective looking like this was, because the moment I walked back toward the festival, I felt the difference immediately. People looked at me without flinching. People blushed. People glanced away. People stared like they were curious instead of disgusted. To my surprise, no one recognized me. And after weeks of being stared at like trash, that alone almost messed with my head. By the time I returned to the fountain area, the entourage was already in the central market. I positioned myself near a stall and pretended to browse accessories. I took my time, knowing the stall owner was getting annoyed, but chose to let me look. Everyone's attention was already on the convoys. The closer the entourage got, the louder my heartbeat felt in my ears. I could feel sweat under the makeup. I could feel the wig itch. I could feel the weight of what I was about to do pressing against my ribs. But I couldn't hesitate. No, I would not hesitate. So I stepped out from the stall and walked straight into the middle of the road, directly in the path of the entourage. Then I lowered my head and knelt. A sudden quiet filled the marketplace. Kids stopped laughing. People stopped talking. You could hear a pin drop. For a second, it felt like every eye in the city landed on my back. The guards were the first to react. I felt their attention lock on to me. I heard their boots shift against the pavement. I heard steel unsheathing sounds. I kept my head down. I didn't make any sudden movements until the silence settled again. Once I had everyone's attention, I lifted my head just enough for my voice to carry forward. "Your Highness," I said loudly and clearly, "I beg your pardon for the disruption." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The guards tensed. The stall owner nearest me looked like she might faint. I kept going before anyone could decide to drag me away. "I am Lin Yao of the Lin family," and I said, "I have come to confess my crimes and to ask for judgment in front of the people I harmed." The moment my name left my mouth, the crowd erupted into whispers. Shock hit first, then confusion right after. People started speaking fast, turning their heads, trying to make sense of the sight in front of them. I heard a few sneers, and I knew I needed to capitalize right now, before the crowd's mood turned against me again. Because most people weren't expecting this. They expected a disgraced noble to be arrogant, to demand respect, to pretend he was above consequences. They didn't expect him kneeling in the dirt and show humility. And with the disguise and the timing and the sheer ridiculousness of the scene, I had gained something priceless: sympathy points. So I started confessing. Not in a way that sounded like excuses, not in a way that sounded like I was trying to win a pity contest. I named what the Lin family had done, and I named what I had benefited from, and then I named the thing everyone wanted to hear: my history with the Crown Prince. I admitted the ways I had bullied him, the ways I had mocked his upbringing, the ways I had looked down on him and looked down on the common people as if they were something I could step on and never think about again. I didn't soften it. I didn't play devil's advocate. I didn't make myself the victim. I spoke as confidently as I could, because if I sounded weak, they'd tear me apart. And as I spoke, I felt the crowd's emotions shift. Even the hostile faces grew softer. People were really listening to me. I spotted familiar faces in the crowd: merchants I'd worked for, kids I'd taught, women from the shelters and the orphanage. I saw them watching me like they were holding their breath with me. And when they gave me small, encouraging nods, it steadied something inside my chest. It made me keep going, because the truth was simple. Yes, I was performing. Yes, I understood the optics. Yes, I knew I was forcing the Empire's hand. But I didn't have a choice. I was running out of time, and my life was on the line. The guards were waiting for the Crown Prince's signal. I could see the different reactions on their faces, even from where I knelt. Some looked like they pitied me. Some looked irritated, like I was a pest ruining their day. Some were indifferent, watching me like an object until they were told what to do with it. but they all knew what it would look like if they dragged a kneeling person away in front of a crowd. Then the Crown Prince spoke. "Enough," he said, controlled and calm while walking towards me. "Stand," he said while he was just a few inches from me. I didn't stand immediately. I took a moment, deliberately, to make myself look as remorseful as possible. Then I rose slowly and hesitantly met his eyes. The hate on his face hit me like a slap. It was raw and filled with disgust, like just seeing me suck the warmth out of him. And it made my skin crawl. It also broke something in my chest, because it was proof, in one expression, of how much pain I had caused him in this body, how much damage Lin Yao had done to this man long before I ever woke up in the role. But as he looked me over, something else flickered there too. Confusion, maybe, or another emotion I couldn't name. It was gone so fast I thought I imagined it. Then his voice cut through the market again. "Lin Yao," he said, "you will present yourself at the palace in 2 days. You will answer formally for what you have confessed, and you will do so under oath." Whispers exploded again across the crowd. People surged with curiosity, like the whole market wanted to move closer at once. I caught sight of those familiar faces again, and their expressions, soft, hopeful, proud, hit me so hard my knees nearly gave out. I tried to stay upright, but I couldn't. My legs buckled and I started to fall. And for a split second, I was sure my face was about to meet the ground. Until a hand caught me. Strong and decisive, the Crown Prince grabbed me. He hauled me upright so hard it almost hurt. His grip clamped around my shoulder and waist like he meant to hold me still through force alone. And his hands were so much bigger than mine that I felt small in a way I hadn't felt before. I could already tell it was going to bruise. He leaned in close enough that, from the outside, it probably looked like a noble gesture. It wasn't. His mouth was near my ear, and his voice dropped low, vibrating with hate. "I don't know what your fucking plan is," he hissed. "And honestly, I don't give a fuck." My whole body went cold. "You've been a thorn at my side since I came into the city," he continued, his grip tightening. "You and your family have done nothing but abuse the people you were supposed to protect." My skin prickled with goosebumps. I started shaking, and I couldn't even stop it. "So hear me when I say this," he practically growled. "If you think this pathetic little display is going to make me turn a blind eye to your injustices, you've got another thing coming." He leaned even closer, the words biting. I could feel his heavy breath down my neck. "If I find out this is some elaborate plan to take advantage of my people again, I will make sure the palace becomes your grave." Then he released me, not gently, but like he was letting go of something disgusting. And he walked past me, back with his entourage and into his role. But as he moved, I saw it, just for a second. That troubled look on his face, like he was carrying something heavier than anger, and it shattered me. Crown Prince Zhao Jingyang learned from a young age not to lose composure in public. He learned early that nobles smiled for reasons that had nothing to do with kindness. He learned early that the palace was full of people who said one thing and meant another. So he built himself a wall and carefully implemented his tasks, be it campaigns, reforms, public programs, and initiatives like literacy efforts that reinforced that the kingdom and the palace did not exist only for the powerful few. That was why he always attended the harvest festival, even before he was crown prince. He wanted to walk through the market with his advisors and be seen, to speak to the people, to hear what they celebrated and what they struggled with, to show them directly that the royals rule with them in mind, not above them. This year was not supposed to be any different. He planned on making it through the town center, then go to a local coffee house and enjoy some traveling performances. Until a woman randomly out of nowhere knelt in the middle of the road in front of him. His guards moved instinctively, but Zhao Jingyang raised a hand and halted them. If someone went that far out of their way to stop the crown prince's procession during a festival, it had to be serious. He prepared himself to listen, and then the voice spoke. It was a voice he could never forget. It was the voice that had made him feel small when he was younger, when he had no secure footing in the palace, when he was forced to swallow humiliation because he could not afford to retaliate. He would recognize it anywhere, even in sleep. Lin Yao. And as Zhao Jingyang watched the kneeling figure lift their head, he felt multiple things hit him at once. Recognition, anger, and then the most irritating part of all, an unwanted flush under his cheeks, which sparked his rage even further. The absurdity of Lin Yao, dressed beautifully as a woman, kneeling in the dirt, turning the street into a stage, unsettled him. It made him furious, because even he could admit it was effective. Lin Yao had chosen a perfect setting, a perfect trap, a confession in front of the people, a narrative crafted to drag attention away from old accusations and force everyone to witness a new image, a disgraced heir showing repentance and asking for judgment publicly. Zhao Jingyang watched the crowd shifting as Lin Yao spoke. He saw reluctant interest forming. He saw merchants listening. He saw commoners, people who had every reason to hate Lin Yao, showing conflict in their eyes because the confession made it difficult to dismiss him outright. And Zhao Jingyang understood the danger immediately. If he silenced Lin Yao, the palace would look cold and tyrannical, the kind of power that refused second chances. If he ignored him, he would look like a prince who couldn't be bothered to acknowledge his own people's pleas. And if he punished him publicly in this moment, he risked turning Lin Yao into something worse than a nuisance. He risked turning him into a symbol. So Zhao Jingyang did the only thing that preserved control. He summoned Lin Yao to the palace under oath, where sincerity could be tested in a controlled setting instead of being decided by public emotion. Even then, he could not help but snap as he was helped Lin Yao up. He found himself with unquestionable anger to the thought of being manipulated once again. As he held Lin Yao, and seething with anger, he could not help but notice how small Lin Yao was, how soft his waist felt under the silk dress, and how good he smelled up close. And that made Zhao Jingyang even more furious, this time with himself for even entertaining those thoughts. Afterwards, Zhao Jingyang still made his rounds in the market. He still spoke to the people. He still listened, smiled, nodded, answered. But his focus kept slipping. Again and again, his mind returned to the same image. Lin Yao kneeling, confessing, forcing a response. By the time his advisor asked whether he needed to retire early, Zhao Jingyang felt drained, like he had been working all night without rest. He wanted space. He wanted silence. He wanted time alone to think, but he intended to finish the tour. And as he continued walking through the festival, he felt the clear unease, irritation, and a troubled sense of being pulled into something he hadn't wanted to touch. For someone who survived the palace by anticipating the nobles' every move, Zhao Jingyang realized with sharp annoyance that Lin Yao had managed something rare. He had made himself impossible to predict and ignore. 2 days passed faster than I wanted them to. The morning of the hearing, I did something I hadn't done since I woke up in this body. I dressed like a noble. Not because I missed it, not because I wanted to reclaim anything. I did it because the palace wasn't the market, and the court wasn't a street corner. If I showed up looking like a desperate laborer, the nobles would treat it like proof that I didn't belong there. They would turn my confession into a spectacle. So I wore what Lin Yao still had left that was decent. I cleaned myself up. I combed my hair properly. I stood in front of the mirror and forced my spine straight. Then I stepped outside and I expected people to stare. I expected people to whisper. I expected the old disgust to flare back up the moment they saw silk on my body again. Instead, the city surprised me. The merchants I'd been working with offered me a ride to the palace gates because they said it wouldn't look right for me to arrive alone on foot. One of them pressed a small wrapped packet into my hands, dried food, salted and packed tight so it wouldn't spoil. "Eat," he said bluntly, like he was embarrassed to sound kind. "You'll be there all day." Even people who had hated me months ago gave me small, careful encouragement as I passed. Nothing dramatic, no speeches, just the kind of looks that said, "Keep going. Don't ruin this. Don't waste the chance you've worked so hard for." A woman I didn't recognize stepped close enough to shove another packet of dried food into my sleeve and then quickly backed away. "Keep your head up," she muttered, "and don't let them twist you." I didn't trust my voice to respond, and I could feel tears filling my eyes, so I nodded and hopped into the carriage. By the time we reached the palace, my stomach was churning so much that it physically hurt. The gates were too tall. The stone was too clean. The guards looked at me like they already knew what they wanted me to be. But this time, they let me through. I was escorted into the court chamber with all the ceremony of a man being led to his execution. The crown prince and all the nobles were already there. The crown prince sat like he belonged to the room in a way no one else did. Calm posture, steady gaze, everything controlled. But when his eyes landed on me, the control sharpened into something colder. I knew he would never forgive me, and I had made peace with that. I didn't come here to be forgiven. I just wanted to be alive by the end of the story. I bowed properly when instructed. I followed enough etiquette to keep myself from being dragged out on principle. And then the hearing began. At first, it went the way court always went in stories. Ritual, formality, nobles speaking as if they were saints. But I could tell most were restless and eager for me to speak. Most likely for them to gain leverage, but nevertheless, I gathered my courage and began. I spoke plainly. No word games, no polished evasions. No, your humble servant begs the mercy of heaven nonsense. I admitted to what Lin Yao had done. I named the bullying. I named the cruelty. I named the way I used status like a weapon and called it tradition. I named the pleasure Lin Yao had taken in humiliating someone who couldn't fight back. And when the nobles tried to interrupt me, when they tried to force me to wait, to soften, to phrase it properly, I didn't play along. Most likely, they were scared that I would incriminate their sons or daughters. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't disrespect the court. I just kept telling the truth, the way things actually went down. That was the first time I saw real displeasure ripple through the room. They didn't like sincerity that they couldn't control. The crown prince pushed me hard. He wasn't gentle about his questions. He pressed for motives. He pressed for details. "What do you want?" he demanded at one point, eyes sharp. "Say it clearly." "I want to live," I said, "and I want to stop being the kind of person who makes living cost other people their dignity." More murmurs rippled through the court. The nobles were clearly in discomfort. The crown prince didn't look satisfied. He looked cautious. "So what is your plan?" he asked. "What do you intend to do with this so-called change?" That was where the court expected a noble answer. Reinstate the household, reclaim land, restore titles, or some stupid shit like that. "I don't have a plan to restore my house," I said. "I don't deserve that. If I earn anything, it should be earned through work that benefits the people I harmed. I want to be useful. Put me to work somewhere I can't hide. I'll gladly do it." That line made the nobles shift. Because they could fight ambition, they understood. But a man who refused the obvious path was harder to control. The crown prince watched me for a long moment like he was trying to catch the lie in my declarations. Then he asked for the one thing that made my hands go cold. "Your parents," he said. "Where are they?" I answered honestly. I told the court they were out of the capital under merchant escort because I couldn't trust what my family's desperation would drag them into. I didn't ask the palace to save them. I didn't ask the palace to restore them. I simply admitted the truth. I'd been afraid they would ruin all of us, and I'd separated them from the capital because I didn't know what else to do. The court hated that I easily admitted that too, especially since I am sure some of them wanted to use my parents for their own gain. But they couldn't call it treason. They couldn't call it rebellion. They couldn't call it manipulation without also admitting their involvement. And in the end, the nobles couldn't find a clean reason to execute me on the spot without it looking suspicious. So they opted for control. They put forward a list of conditions, one of which is a probation period of 9 months where I would have to complete closely supervised work. Some restrictions would lift. I would regain access to civic spaces and to the library. The deadlines and debts the Lin family owed would not vanish, and my house would not be restored. Our status would remain stripped. I would not be welcomed back as a noble, but I would be allowed to exist, which was my goal to begin with. And in exchange, I would serve the empire directly under the crown prince's supervision, with my work monitored closely enough that any slip would be recorded and punished. The crown prince's voice delivered the final terms without warmth. "You will work for the palace," and he said. "You will do so promptly. You will be observed. And if you fail, the palace will not hesitate to end this experiment." Then came the last part. I would be offered residency quarters within the palace grounds, housing for workers who served the court where meals were also provided. They were giving me the option to put myself directly under the tiger's nose. If I wanted them to believe I was serious, I couldn't keep running back to the city where my effort could be dismissed as performance. If I lived here, close enough that the crown prince could watch me breathe, then my change would have to be real. That night, before I moved in, I went home and did what I had been trying not to do for weeks. I sold almost everything, not the mansion itself. I wasn't foolish enough to trigger suspicion by selling the one thing everyone would notice, but everything inside it that mattered. Decorations, remaining furnitures, anything that could be turned into coin. I stripped the estate bare. I gathered every last piece of value I could and gave the money to the merchant who had helped me survive. Use this for my parents, I told him. Food, housing, whatever they need. Keep them alive. He stared at me like he couldn't decide whether to respect me or call me insane. Then he nodded once. I'll do it, he said. Don't die in there. The next morning I walked into the palace as an employee, and if I thought the city hated me, oh boy, I got a rude awakening. The palace was much worse. The first few days, everyone were openly content with my presence. Servants refused to look at me. Maids walked past me like I didn't exist. Food arrived late, cold, or missing basic things like utensils. My laundry basket sat untouched until it became obvious someone was leaving it there on purpose. When I asked a head maid what I should do, she smiled without it reaching her eyes. It is improper, she said, for someone in your position to handle such matters himself. And if no one handles them? I asked. She gave a small shrug like it wasn't her problem. So I did what I'd been doing since the beginning. I found a workaround. Once a week before sunrise, I left the palace grounds and went into the city. I carried my laundry basket and I didn't care who saw. I went straight to the orphanage, where the women took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. They just made space. They showed me how to wash properly, how to wring fabric without tearing it, how to dry things quickly, how to keep my hands from cracking in winter water. In the palace, it was humiliating to always be belittled. And weirdly, it grounded me. It reminded me that palace cruelty wasn't the whole world. Then one morning, everything changed. I was halfway through rinsing soap from a shirt when a voice cut through the courtyard. What the hell are you doing? I snapped upright so fast I nearly lost my balance. The crown prince stood there, eyes hard, like he'd caught me committing a crime. I froze, mind racing. Had I broken a rule? Missed a summons? Failed some protocol I didn't know existed? My mouth started apologizing on instinct. I'm sorry, I blurted, then hated myself for it. If I did something wrong, The crown prince's jaw tightened, and he looked almost irritated by my panic. Save your apology, he said, clipped. I saw you leaving the palace before dawn and followed you. That stunned me into silence. He took one step closer, gaze dropping to the soaked fabric, the soap, the water, the basket. Why? He demanded, like the word physically hurt him to say. Are you doing laundry here? I swallowed, because the obvious answer was also the one that would get people punished, and I didn't want anyone punished on my behalf. I couldn't get it done in the palace, I said carefully, so I came here. His eyes narrowed, sharp with suspicion. The palace has facilities, he said. The palace has servants. I shifted, uncomfortable. The women here were kind, I said. They taught me. The crown prince stared at me like he could smell something rotten, then turned and without another word, he left. I went back to rinsing, hands shaking, heart pounding, wondering what just happened. I didn't have to wonder long. That day, the palace became a storm. People were called into the crown prince's quarters one by one. Servants vanished down corridors and came back pale. The atmosphere shifted from contempt to fear so fast it made my skin prickle. I didn't know what was happening. I only knew that by nightfall, people were suddenly helpful. Still not warm, still not brave enough to meet my eyes, but helpful. My laundry basket disappeared with a note attached about when it would return. Spare clothing appeared in my quarters. A place was set for me in the dining hall that didn't look like an afterthought anymore. My bed was made when I came back from work. It was like the entire palace had decided overnight that pretending I didn't exist was dangerous. In the office, the change was quieter. I was given a corner, a stack of paperwork, tasks that were meant to test endurance as much as competence. The advisors still stared at me like they wanted me gone, but none of them dared speak when the crown prince was present. So I worked. I came in early. I stayed late and didn't complain. I took breaks only when others took theirs. I kept my head down and did everything as efficiently as I knew how. And slowly the crown prince started noticing. He still couldn't forgive me. I could feel that in the air every time he looked at me, but he couldn't deny that I was trying. Then, months into the probation, we got into a heated exchange. It happened on an afternoon when the crown prince returned from a lunch with the emperor and the rest of the imperial family. He walked into the office visibly tense and unhappy. His face was composed, but his eyes were darker than usual, like he'd swallowed something poisonous and was forcing himself not to spit it out. The counselors weren't back yet. It was only me. I was sitting at my desk, reading over a report, letting myself breathe and relax for the first time that day. And I swear to God, that quiet moment was what did it. The crown prince looked at me and something in him snapped. "I can't believe you have the nerve," he said, voice low and sharp, "to sit there with that expression." I blinked, confused, then stood immediately. "My apologies, Your Highness." He cut me off. "If I were you," he said, stepping closer, disgust flashing across his face, "I would have the decency to never show my face here again." The words hit me like a punch, and in his eyes I saw it, a deep anger and hatred, the kind that had been living in him since he was young, the kind I had helped carve into him. He didn't stop. "How?" he demanded. "Can you stand here and pretend? After everything you did? After you made it your mission to ruin my life for sport?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out, because I had rehearsed this conversation in my head 100 times, and none of my practiced lines fit the look on his face. I had planned explanations. I had planned to provide context and point out how society and noble culture led me to that path. I had planned to draw on his empathy, but standing there, watching him bleed anger like that, the explanations felt disgusting. So I didn't give them. "I'm sorry," I said, and even that sounded too small. He scoffed. "Easy for you to say," he said. "You get to apologize. You get to move forward. You get to stand in my palace like you belong here." "No," I said quickly. "No, I don't." My voice shook, but I forced it steady. "What I did to you was unforgivable," I said. "And I know it. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't think I deserve it." The crown prince's expression flickered, surprise maybe, then hardened again. "So what are you doing here?" he snapped. "Performing remorse until everyone gets tired of watching?" I swallowed hard. I could feel my pulse in my throat. And then, for the first time, I said the part I'm sure the original Lin Yao would have hated. "I was cruel because I was insecure," I said. "Because I believed power meant I could take whatever I wanted, and you, someone I thought was beneath me, made me feel threatened just by existing." The words came out raw and honest. "I treated you like a stepping stone," I said, "like an object I could break to prove I mattered. It was sick. It was unnecessary. It was wrong." My chest tightened, my eyes started watering, and my voice cracking, but I forced myself not to look away. "I don't have words that will fix what I did," I said. "But if you tell me what you want, what you need from me to atone, I will do it. I won't hesitate." The crown prince stared at me like he didn't know what to do with sincerity that didn't beg for a reward. And I kept going, because stopping felt like cowardice. "There isn't a week that passes where I don't think about it," I said. "There isn't a day where I don't remember something and feel sick. I can't undo it, but I can spend the rest of my life trying to be the opposite of what I was." There was a pregnant pause, and the crown prince's anger didn't vanish, but it shifted. Like something inside him had been expecting a lie and didn't know where to put the truth. Finally, he turned away sharply. "Just because you apologize," he said, voice tight, "doesn't mean you'll be forgiven." "I know," I said immediately. "I know." He paused like he wanted to say more, but didn't. Then he walked out. And as he left, I heard myself speak before I could stop it. "As long as you can tolerate me," I said quietly, tears pouring down my face, "I'll keep proving it." He didn't turn back. But the weeks after that felt different in the office area. Not warm nor particularly friendly, but it was definitely less openly hostile. The Crown Prince stopped glaring at me across the room like my presence was an insult. He still got lost in thought sometimes, eyes drifting to me like he was remembering things he didn't want to remember. But the disgust wasn't as sharp. And I told myself that was enough. I kept working. I kept my head down. I still made it to the orphanage when I could. Those visits became the one day a month where I could visibly relax, and especially somewhere I could breathe without feeling watched. Slowly, I started noticing the Crown Prince mood shifts as we worked together. His subtle irritation when nobles resisted reforms meant to help commoners. The way he listened when people spoke, like he really wanted to understand instead of simply collecting information. The way his exhaustion showed up only when he thought no one was looking. He was going to be a great ruler. And it made me feel relieved because, for the first time since waking up in this world, I thought maybe this place isn't that bad to make a life here after all. Then something else happened that felt even more impossible. The Crown Prince and I started talking. At first only in the mornings, when we were the only two in the office. Short exchanges, mundane things, questions about reports, logistics, clarifications. Then the conversation stretched into politics, policy implementation strategies, etc. And to my surprise, the Crown Prince started asking for my input. He looked visibly satisfied after each of our talks, which made my day. He started ordering tea in the mornings. He started inviting me on early walks through the palace gardens, framed as discussion time, to help prepare for upcoming court discussions. Two men getting used to each other's presence. Two men learning how to breathe in the same space without flinching. And without either of us naming it, without either of us daring to call it what it was, something shifted. Fondness wasn't the right word yet, but it was the beginning of something that could grow into it. By the 8th month, I'd stopped pretending this was normal. Not out loud, obviously. Out loud, everything was work. Everything was about efficiency and how the Crown Prince required my presence. But if you spend as much time with someone as I did with Zhao Jingyan, there comes a point where you either name it or you start looking stupid on purpose. And I wasn't going to be one of those oblivious protagonists. You know the ones. Oh no, why is he staring at me? Why is he standing so close? Why did he cancel a minister meeting just to walk me to the library? Please, I'm from New York. I know what too much looks like. At first, it was small things. He started calling for me for problems he didn't need me for. A minor complaint from a district official? Bring Lin Yao. A report that could have been summarized by any clerk? Bring Lin Yao. A court meeting where my presence would clearly make the nobles foam at the mouth? Bring Lin Yao. And I'd stand there beside him, pretending I didn't feel the stares drilling holes into my skull, pretending I didn't hear the way they said my name, like it was something dirty. Sometimes I caught it, the way Zhao Jingyan's gaze would flick to me, quick and controlled, like he needed to confirm I was still there, like he needed to anchor himself. Then came the excuse that wasn't an excuse. My quarters got moved, closer to the royal wing. Official reasoning, important projects, efficiency, time saving. But deep down, we both knew. Everyone knew. No one dared say it. And then he started coming with me everywhere. The orphanage was supposed to be my one clean break a month, my one place where I could step out of palace tension and remember I was still human. Then one day, Zhao Jingyan appeared on the orphanage doorsteps like it was nothing. No fanfare, no guards crowding the doorway, just him, dressed down as much as a crown prince can dress down, standing there like he belonged. The women almost fainted. The kids didn't care. They swarmed him like he was a new climbing structure. And the ridiculous part? He let them. He crouched in the dirt. He let them tug his sleeves. He listened to their nonsense stories like they mattered. He actually laughed. Not the polite court laugh. A real one. Soft. Unguarded. And I stood there watching, like an idiot, feeling my chest do something stupid. Because the crown prince was supposed to be cold, controlled, untouchable. But there he was, with a child on his back and another one trying to braid his hair with a ribbon. When he looked up and caught me staring, his mouth twitched like he knew exactly what I was thinking. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. And that's when I realized the truly dangerous part. It wasn't just attraction. It wasn't just tension, it was comfort. We were getting comfortable. In each other's space. In each other's silence. And no story lets you have that without collecting payment later. So yeah, I noticed the way he started saving the first cup of tea for me, even when he didn't comment on it. I noticed the way he'd tilt his head toward me slightly during court debates, like he wanted my reaction before he made his decision. I noticed the way my own feet started carrying me into meetings I didn't need to attend, just because I wanted to be near him. At first I told myself it was duty. Then I stopped lying. Because I'm not 16, and I'm not stupid. So when the 8th month ended, and we were riding back from the orphanage, late afternoon sun, carriage rocking, the smell of dust and warm stone drifting in, I finally did what my sanity demanded. I turned to him and said flatly, "So what the hell are we doing?" Zhao Jingyan blinked, actually blinked, like he wasn't prepared for me to be that direct, even after months of me being me. "What do you mean?" he asked, tone cautious. I stared at him. "You know exactly what I mean." His ears went faintly pink, which would have been cute if it didn't make me want to scream. And then he did something that almost made me laugh. He tried to recover with authority. "You really do speak your mind," he said, like that was the problem. I shrugged. "One of my top qualities." That got a short breath out of him. Not quite a laugh, but close. Then I leaned forward slightly, elbows on my knees, and dropped the jokes. "I'm not going to play this game where we pretend this is just work," I said. "We're spending too much time together. You keep pulling me into everything. You move my quarters. You follow me to the orphanage. You stare at me like you're trying to decide whether to kill me or—" I cut myself off before I could say the obvious word. His gaze sharpened. "Or what?" he asked quietly. I swallowed. My heart was beating like it wanted to climb out of my ribs. "Or kiss me," I said, blunt as ever. "And I need to know which one it is before I lose my mind." We spent a few minutes in silence staring at each other. The carriage wheels kept turning. The outside world kept moving. Inside, the air went heavy. Zhao Jingyan looked away, jaw tight, like he was fighting with himself. And then he said something that made my throat close up. "You think I haven't noticed?" I froze. He looked back at me, eyes steady now, voice low. "I noticed the first time you stood in front of me in that street," he said. "I noticed what you did. I noticed what you forced me to do." My stomach sank. I started to apologize out of habit, and he held up a hand. "No," he said. "Listen. I don't trust you easily," he said, "and I still remember what you did. I remember all of it." I nodded, throat burning. "I know. But," he continued, and that single word made my entire body tense, "I have watched you for months. I have watched you work until your hands cramped. I have watched you take punishment without complaint. I have watched you choose the orphanage over comfort and pride." His eyes flicked to my face like he was bracing for me to flinch. "I don't know when it happened," he admitted. "I only know it did." My chest felt tight. "Zhao Jingyan." He cut me off, voice sharper. "Don't," he said. "Don't cheapen it." Then he exhaled slowly. "I don't think this is some fairy tale love," he said. "I don't think you earned me." That hit like a slap, and he must have seen it on my face because his expression softened a fraction. "I mean it the way it is," he said. "I want you near me. I want your voice in my court. I want your mind beside mine. I want—" He stopped. His cheeks were flushed now. Then very quietly he finished. "I want you." My throat closed. I just stared at him, stunned, because even if I'd suspected it, hearing it out loud was different. It felt undeserved. It felt impossible. And yeah, my eyes started burning. Of course they did. Zhao Jingyan's mouth twitched. "For someone who once terrified half the capital," he murmured, "you're such a crybaby." I made a face through tears. "That's not a compliment." "It is," he said immediately, too fast, like he didn't want me to misunderstand. It's just—" He looked briefly panicked, which was honestly the most endearing thing I'd ever seen. I let out a shaky laugh that sounded like a sob. "I really regret it," I said, voice breaking. "All of it. I wish I could erase that part of my history." He went still. Then he said softly, If you erased it, we wouldn't be here. I lowered my gaze. I guess not. His hand reached out, warm fingers against my cheek, steadying my face like he was anchoring me. Look at me, he said. I did. And then he kissed me. Not a gentle kiss, not a hesitant kiss. A real one. Deep, decisive, like he'd finally made a choice and refused to be talked out of it. For a few minutes, the world didn't exist. Not the palace, not the nobles, not my past, not my probation clock ticking down. Just his mouth, his hand on my face, the heat of him, the shock of being wanted anyway. When we finally pulled apart, I was breathing like I'd run a mile. And Zhao Jingyan, Crown Prince Zhao Jingyan, looked at me like he was already planning how to burn the world down for me, which was terrifying and also, stupidly, comforting. The moment we returned to the palace, he stopped pretending. He started inviting me to meals, openly. He started summoning me to his chambers, shamelessly. He started using my name in court like it didn't matter who disliked it. Rumors exploded. Nobles hissed behind the scenes. Servants watched with wide eyes, and then, inevitably, the crown prince was called into the throne room. I wasn't there for that conversation, but I heard about it within a day because palace gossip travels faster than plague. They demanded explanations. They demanded propriety. They demanded he remember his duty. And Zhao Jingyan, apparently, asked them one question in return. Is my work unsatisfactory? Silence. Because no matter how much they hated him, they couldn't deny his competence. They couldn't deny his reforms were working. They couldn't deny he was holding the empire together. So when they couldn't attack his work, they attacked his choice. And he did something that made the whole palace tremble. He said coldly, "You couldn't give me a family. You couldn't give me warmth. You couldn't even give me a table where I belonged." Then quieter, sharper, "So give me freedom." People said the emperor's face changed for a split second. Like regret tried to rise and got strangled before it could speak. But it was gone too fast for anyone to challenge it. After that, Zhao Jingyan doubled down. He started hosting small events under the excuse of policy discussion, and somehow I was always seated beside him. He started assigning me visible projects. He started letting the court see me succeed. Not because I needed praise, but because he wanted to make it expensive to remove me. And I genuinely tried, to stay out of the spotlight. I didn't want to be anyone's scandal. I didn't want to be anyone's leverage. By the time the end-of-year festival approached, I was exhausted. The probation was almost done. My death flags felt quieter. So I did what any sane person would do. I planned an exit, not a dramatic one, just a quiet retreat. If the palace decided to announce an arranged marriage for him, I wasn't going to fight for a place I didn't believe I deserved. I wasn't going to become the jealous lover trope. I wasn't going to die for romance. I was going to disappear before the story could punish me for hoping. So on the night of the festival, I kept to the edges. I stayed near the balcony when I could. I avoided conversations. I avoided wine. I avoided nobles. Then the royal family called everyone into the main hall, an announcement and mandatory attendance. I felt dread crawl up my spine as I went inside. The hall was glittering with lantern light and wealth and carefully controlled smiles. Nobles lined up like vultures in silk. I found a place near the side and kept my head down. The emperor began speaking. Words about tradition, words about stability, words about the future. Then Zhao Jingyan stepped forward. And for a second, something in the room shifted, like even the nobles sensed this was about to go wrong. Zhao Jingyan's voice carried clean and sharp. "I have chosen my betrothed." The room went dead. My stomach dropped. Oh no, oh no, oh no, oh no. He turned. His gaze locked onto me across the hall like a spear. My blood turned to ice. Then he held out his hand and said my name. Lin Yao. I didn't move. I genuinely didn't move because my brain refused to believe it. Nobles gasped. Someone made a sound like a choked laugh. Someone else hissed his name like a curse. Zhao Jingyan didn't care. He took 3 steps toward me, like he was walking through enemy lines, and stopped directly in front of me. His hand was still out, so I took it. And the moment my fingers touched his, the room exploded. Disapproval, fury, shock. I heard the nobles protesting before the emperor even finished breathing. But Zhao Jingyan didn't release me. He lifted my hand like he was presenting proof. Then he leaned down and kissed me in front of everyone. Not gentle, not subtle. A claim, a statement, a war declaration. My entire body went hot with shock. And somehow, inside that chaos, I realized something that made my vision blur. I didn't win by being perfect. I survived by being human, visible, accountable, stubborn enough to stand in the open and not run. Fate didn't rewrite itself because I became good. It rewrote itself because I refused to disappear, because I endured, because I stood there long enough for someone to choose me anyway. And when Zhao Jingyan squeezed my hand, steady, possessive, certain, I understood the last terrifying truth. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a different one.
Quote of the week. The sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. Hannah Arendt. Thank you for listening to A Life That Refused to End, a BL short story. Hope you enjoyed this story. Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you'd love more stories or have a request. New videos uploaded every Friday.